Akimitsu is a miserable loser who avoids girls so he doesn't turn into a playboy like his father. However, when his Gunnar urges almost take over, he moves into a temple to become a monk, but discovers all the temple girls are baddies who want him. It all began during his early years, when Akimitsu's dad advised him to chase multiple women instead of one so that he'd never end up lonely, and he felt that his dad was the coolest person in the world, but the deadbeat ended up abandoning him to get natural milk from baddies overseas. Many years later, Akimitsu is now in school, and his Gunnar friends invite him to join them at a pleasure house that evening, but he declines because he feels that he doesn't need women in his life.
Why are you gay?
While walking home one evening, Akimitsu is frustrated as he remembers how every woman in his neighborhood treated him like Diddy because of his father's actions, and he decides to wipe away the dishonor by living a noble single life free from girls. Suddenly, a large bag of rice collides with him, and cannonbolts him straight into the wall. As he wonders where it came from, a purple-haired baddie named Yuzuki suddenly arrives, carrying two identical rice bags, and she apologizes while explaining that her cart tipped over. While she checks on him, Bro is completely speechless because her beauty has sent his brain straight into airplane mode, but he ignores her and walks away as fast as he can to avoid temptation. However, when he tries to sleep that night, he dreams about Yuzuki's super cute face, which makes him jump right out of bed. The next day, Akimitsu's stoic act breaks even more, as he admires the jiggle physics of girls on the tracks, and when his friends invite him to a mixer, he finally agrees to join them. However, post-party clarity hits him like a hammer afterwards, as he realizes that he's been failing at school and giving in to desires ever since he fell in love at first sight with Yuzuki. To remedy the situation, he takes a leave of absence from school and heads to a shrine recommended by his uncle with the hopes of becoming a monk who is closed off to women. However, when he rings the bell, the person who answers the door is none other than Yuzuki, and Bro is so stunned that he starts convulsing on the ground, causing her to run away for help. Akimitsu thinks he's been trapped in some sort of low-rate genjutsu, but Yuzuki returns in a saucy outfit
Wow! Beautiful!
that reveals a good portion of her plots and cheerfully welcomes him to the shrine. The stimulation runs like a storm through his body, and he tries to maintain composure, but eventually folds as he begs Yuzuki to marry him. Shortly afterwards, Yuzuki serves Akimitsu some tea in the living room, but he still can't control himself around her, so he decides to go clear his head with a round of toilet stroking. On his way there, he sees a cat trapped in a well and tries to save it, but ends up falling into the well himself. Meanwhile, Yuzuki calls the nun to complain that the man she was arranged to marry came a day earlier than planned, but she informs Yuzuki that her actual planned husband is right beside her, making Yuzuki wonder who Akimitsu is. Just then, Yuzuki's sister, Tsukuyo, arrives, and Yuzuki tells her that a malevolent spirit has appeared at their shrine. But Tsukuyo doubts her until she sees Akimitsu, looking like a bloody zombie. As the girls freak out, an injured Akimitsu tries to find an ambulance, but instead, he falls and accidentally grabs Tsukuyo's cushions.
Yeah, boy.
But Kazuki saves her by drop-kicking him in the head. The girls start running away from him, thinking he's a special grade cursed spirit, and Akimitsu chases after them to plead his case. But this makes them even more scared. Suddenly, their sister, Kuraga, arrives, but immediately passes out when she sees Akimitsu. In another room, a baddie named Mia is explaining her latest art piece to her friend, Kagura, but she storms out of the room to know what's causing the noise, only to get speared to the ground by Akimitsu. She starts freaking out when she notices that there's a boy on top of her, but Kagura simply laughs at her. When he regains consciousness, Akimitsu walks outside and tries to reason with Tsukuyo and Hazuki, but they still see him as a zombie, so Hazuki knocks him out with a brutal punch. A while later, the nun of the temple, Kiki, explains to Hazuki that Akimitsu was simply visiting the shrine that his uncle recommended, so she apologizes to him. Kiki then proposes that Akimitsu should train at the shrine as a monk for a while, but the girls refuse because it's been turned into a nunnery that shouldn't have any boys. Seeing this, Akimitsu decides to leave that evening because he doesn't want to cause any more trouble, and he doubts that Yuzuki remembers their first meeting. However, Yuzuki realizes that he's not a bad person, so she meets him on a bench and asks him to stay the night, but he declines because he wants to do things on his own for a while longer. She then calls him weird for proposing on their second meeting, and Akimitsu is shocked that she remembers their first encounter, so his face glows red like a tomato. As they introduce themselves, Yuzuki realizes that Akimitsu is the son of the man who owes them 20 million, so she drags him back to the shrine, where he promises to repay the money. However, the other girls are furious and want to unalive him for his father's crimes, so Yuzuki decides that Akimitsu would repay the debt with his body, causing everyone to freak out. Seeing that everyone is confused, Yuzuki explains that she means Akamitsu will pay off his debt by living and working at the shrine, but the salty blondies, Tsukuyo and Mia, argue that he's blackmailing her. However, Yuzuki shuts them up by karate chopping a rock clean in half, and after they agree with her proposal, she offers to show Akamitsu around the temple, and he gets excited. During the tour, Yuzuki shows a weird statue, which she calls their principal figure, but he's shocked that it's being held together by duct tape, so Yuzuki informs him that they're broke. Hearing this, he promises to do everything he can to repay his debt as quickly as possible, so she thanks him and, with a cheerful smile, tells him to call her by her first name. Akamitsu gets so excited that he holds her hand, and the other girls see this from their hiding spot, so they hold a meeting to discuss the ways to stop Akamitsu from rizzing Yuzuki up. During the meeting, Tsukuyo suggests throwing Akamitsu out, but Koko suddenly arrives and suggests using sus tactics instead. Her plan involves the girls offering their melons to Akamitsu and kicking him out when he takes the bait, because she knows Yuzuki won't object to it. However, when Tsukuyo asks who will be the one to sway him, all the other girls choose her because she has the body shape of Sydney Sweeney. Tsukuyo argues that Kiki would be a better fit since she has larger calcium cannons, but Kiki refuses because she's a nun, and the other girls say some inspiring words to motivate Tsukuyo. The next morning, Akamitsu jumps out of bed and does all the chores at lightning speed before heading to the kitchen to cook breakfast. He feels happy that he's finally going back to being his incorruptible self, but suddenly, Yuzuki arrives and greets him, and he sees her juicy plots fully displayed in her nightwear.
Nice.
As she talks to him, all his brain cells die once again, making him unaware that he's burning up the food, and after she leaves, he crashes out about how he's given in to his desires again. Tsukuyo sees this from her hiding spot and decides to find a way to drive him out before he spills his gravy all over their house. A while later, Akamitsu calls everyone out for breakfast, and Tsukuyo feels that he'll be trash at cooking. But once she tastes his food, her taste buds go into a frenzy, and she realizes that he's a far better cook than all the girls combined. Seeing this, Akamitsu feels happy that the skills he learned while living independently are finally paying off, and he decides not to rush his goal. However, when he turns back, he sees Tsukuyo waving her fun bags like a flag in his face, which stuns him, and she tells him to wear summer clothes while he works because she feels that it would be so hellish for him that he'd run away. Shockingly, he thanks her and starts celebrating because he's what temple monks wear, and she tells him to get to work, but within seconds, he has the entire house shining brighter than Andrew Tate's head. Tsukuyo is surprised because that task would normally take a day, and she sends him to do some hard administrative work, but Takemitsu suddenly becomes Tony Stark as he finds a bug in the system immediately. Following this, Tsukuyo splashes water on him from a large hose, and Kiki explains that Tsukuyo asked her to train him, but they don't have a waterfall. However, Akamitsu says it's no problem, and he endures the water pressure until he sees Yuzuki in a school uniform, which makes him lose composure, and he starts celebrating because he feels that he's unlocked the avatar state. Tsukuyo is frustrated that her plans are failing, so Kiki proposes one final plan to get Akamitsu to fold. Hours later, Akamitsu enjoys a warm bath, but he decides not to spend too long in the bath since he has to prepare dinner. However, when he opens the door, he sees Tsukuyo sitting in the bathroom, so he jumps right back into the tub. As he tries to ask her what she's doing there, she suddenly starts taking off her uniform. But she's actually worried because her main plan was for Yuzuki to see Akamitsu on top of her after he accidentally slips in the bath. Since that plan has failed, she decides to make it look like Akamitsu is forcing himself on her, and she tries to show even more of her knockers, but gets embarrassed and starts freaking out. Suddenly, she slips and hits the counter, causing a box to fall in her direction, and Akamitsu jumps in to save her. As he checks on her, another box falls on his head, jamming his lips to hers.
Yeah, boy.
And Yuzuki suddenly arrives, so Tsukuyo knocks him away and tries to explain the situation to her. However, Yuzuki coldly tells Akamitsu to leave the room, and all the other girls celebrate, calling Tsukuyo a genius for succeeding in her plans. But Tsukuyo low-key feels bad about it. A while later, she sees Yuzuki in the hallway and calls out to her, but Yuzuki ignores her as she enters the room. She storms into Yuzuki's room to ask why she's avoiding her, but sees that Yuzuki's face is glowing red in embarrassment. And Yuzuki confesses that her brain has been spiraling ever since she saw Akamitsu's eggplant. When Tsukuyo asks why she accepted him into the temple, she explains that it's what their mom would have done, and also points out that Akamitsu was frustrated because he wanted to change himself. This makes Tsukuyo realize she wasn't treating him fairly, and Yuzuki decides that they should go explain things to him. But Kiki suddenly arrives and informs them that he's left the shrine. Meanwhile, Akamitsu is in a shed having sus thoughts about Yuzuki and Tsukuyo, but Yuzuki suddenly arrives and tells him that he needs to rely on others more since the bath situation could have been resolved by just explaining himself. Tsukuyo then arrives and apologizes to him before handing him a fee of 20 bitcoins for stealing her first kiss. Hours later, they return to the temple, and Akamitsu apologizes for his actions, but Mio is so shocked to see him back that she passes out. After Tsukuyo leaves to meet with Yuzuki, Akamitsu joins Kurage in doing the dishes, and she advises him to peek at the girls in the bath because she thinks Yuzuki would like it. Hearing this, Akamitsu thinks she might be Mia Khalifa in disguise, but she says she's only joking and confesses that she likes her sisters better when they act more dumb, which is why she's happy to have him around the house. She then tricks him into opening the bathroom door while they are having a bath.
Wow! Beautiful!
And after they pummel him, Mia arrives and accuses him of being the reason their temple has fallen. Mia then challenges Akamitsu to make her full like he did Tsukuyo and Yuzuki, and claims that she's the one who will save the temple. The girls think she's confused, but clarifies that she doesn't want Akamitsu to move out, and proposes that she cuts off his danglers if he loses their duel. This makes everyone in the room freak out, but Akamitsu is excited because getting his stones removed will help him in his path of becoming a monk. The next morning, the three sisters give Akamitsu some advice on how to win his upcoming duel with Mia and say goodbye to him as they make their way to school. Suddenly, Mia arrives with a dark aura overflowing from her and asks him to show her respect since she's been living at the shrine long before him. However, he ignores her and greets Kagura, who introduces herself as Mia's older sister, but Mia informs him that Kagura is her attendant and not her sister. Akamitsu then asks her to call off the duel, but says she'll never do that because she's determined to turn him into an Unsullied for what he did to her when they first met. She then challenges him to a sword fight, but immediately the battle begins. She unleashes a powerful slash that nearly splits him in half before promising to end him in her next attack. However, Akamitsu doesn't want to hurt her, so when she charges in a second time, he tries to stop her with a barehanded technique, but her melons suddenly get exposed.
Wow! Beautiful!
Mia gets embarrassed that the Virgin has seen her treasures, so she tries to behead him, and Akamitsu tries to counter but ends up grabbing the cushions instead,
Yeah, boy.
causing her brain to overheat. Since Akamitsu won the duel, Kagura asks him how he wants to punish Mia, but he hesitates, so she decides to pick for him from a book which has a collection of sus penises. When she shows Mia the contents of the book, she gets flustered but still decides to do it. However, Akamitsu stops her and says he wants the book instead, but the direction of his fingers makes her think that he's talking about her milk factories, and he makes matters worse by telling her his weird plans until she runs away. Later that night, Akamitsu is on the bed, thinking about how he failed to reconcile with Mia, and he realizes that he needs the Book of Penances since it could have hints for the enlightenment he seeks. However, when he opens his eyes, he sees Mia on top of him, asking him to raid her dungeon as punishment for losing the duel. Akamitsu is confused, but she suddenly pops out her milk bags and smothers them in his face while asking him to take action. As he struggles to catch his breath, she tells him not to worry because it's a dream, so he stretches his hand to claim his succulent prize, but sees that Kagura is recording the whole thing. He immediately pushes Mia away and tells her not to offer herself, because what he actually wanted was the book, and she gets so flustered that she dashes away faster than Usain Bolt. In the yard, she decides to hide and meditate in the shed, but when she enters, she sees Akamitsu, who reveals that Kagura sent him there. Hearing this, she realizes what Kagura is plotting, so she tries to leave, but notices that Kagura has locked the door from the outside. Akamitsu explains that they're stuck in that room until morning because they don't have their smartphones, and no one would hear them screaming. But when he approaches Mia, she tells him not to come close to her. He then asks her about a weird desk in the room, so she explains that it's called a sutra transcription desk, and it's used in displaying the heads of those who turned against Buddhist teachings. She suddenly sneezes, and Akamitsu tries to hand her the blanket again, but she pushes him away while yelling that she'd get in the mood if he gets closer. As he wonders what she means, she suddenly starts crying from embarrassment, so he covers the blanket over her head. Shortly after, she asks him to forget about what happened there and in his room, but he says it would be hard for him to forget. When he asks why she acted out of character earlier, she explains that her true nature is wilder than Bonnie Blue, which is why she came to Japan. Apparently, she came from a weird family, and ever since she was in diapers, her mom used to motivate her to find 100 different men to satisfy her private needs. In high school, she told her friends about her goal of finding 100 lovers, but it only made them avoid her, and before she knew it, everyone in school started treating her like she had the hantavirus. However, Kagura approached her one day with matching freaky energy, and they became tight friends who talked about their weird fantasies together. One day, Kagura took Mia to the temple, and she was excited to be there because her family name was unknown there, and since it was closed off to men, she felt she could become a new person. However, all of that fell down the drain when Akimitsu arrived and put her in agony with his weird mistakes. After hearing this story, Akimitsu starts crying because it's similar to his own backstory, and after crying with him for a bit, Mia considers running away from the temple to cleanse her mind. However, Akimitsu offers to become her training partner in fighting spicy urges, and she gleefully agrees, so he helps her back to her feet. Suddenly, Kagura arrives and asks them to perform some of the penances in the book, and they both agree because they're confident in their new partnership. The next morning, as Yuzuki cleans the yard, she sees Kagura recording a room, and when she gets close, she sees Akimitsu and Mia doing some corny exercises together. Kagura explains that they're training together, but she still freaks out and punishes them. However, Kiki informs Yuzuki that it's time for her matchmaking, and it's important for the future of the temple. Hearing this, Yuzuki and Akimitsu run as fast as they can, and Yuzuki tells Akimitsu about her plans to enter an arranged marriage to stop the temple from closing down. Eventually, they arrive at a train station, but they miss the train, so Akimitsu steals a bike, and they ride as far as they can. However, the bike runs out of gas, so out of desperation, they jump into a truck, thinking it's a bus, and Yuzuki starts feeling frustrated. But Akimitsu lifts her spirits by telling her of his plans to hijack the bus. After successfully hijacking the truck, Akimitsu and Yuzuki are now in the front seat, and Yuzuki remembers when she told Kiki that she didn't want the temple to close. Back then, Kiki told her that it would take 3 years for her to become head priest, and the temple only had a year left, so she decided to hire a matchmaker. In the present, Akimitsu pulls a driving move straight out of Fast and Furious to get them to the temple in time. But as Yuzuki celebrates, Bro is lying unconscious in the driver's seat. She then thanks him for getting her that far and assures him that she'll handle the rest, and he's confident that she'll succeed because no man can resist her hourglass body figure. As she walks into the temple, Akimitsu feels sad that the girl of his dreams is going after another man, but he wishes her luck anyway because he knows it'll save the temple. Suddenly, a weird lady appears beside him and drags him inside to start cleaning the yard because his clothes made her think he's a temple worker. Inside the temple, Yuzuki greets the four-eyed dude who is meant to be her husband, and he introduces himself as Kijo before asking why she's seeking a matchmaker at her young age. She explains that it's because she loves the Mikazuki temple and sees everyone staying there as her friends and family. But she suddenly notices Akimitsu cleaning the yard, which makes her freak out. She rattles her brain, wondering if it's actually him or a shadow clone, but Akimitsu's mind is already in the gutter, as he starts imagining all the Netflix and chill positions they could do together if they were married. He starts punching himself to get rid of those weird thoughts, and this makes Yuzuki certain that it's actually him, so she gets anxious about what to do next. Seeing this, Akimitsu realizes that his presence is bothering her, and he decides to hide. But the nun appears again and calls him. Shortly after, Akimitsu finds himself on the table right beside Yuzuki and Kijo, and he decides to play Cupid for them, since he can't escape this situation. He asks Kijo what he likes to do on dates, and Kijo says he likes to go to the movies. This makes Kazuki feel relieved as she thinks things could work out, but Akimitsu starts crashing out as he imagines Kijo having a little too much fun with Yuzuki in the dark theater. After snapping himself back to reality, he asks Kijo how he likes to spend his days off, and Kijo says he prefers hot springs trips, but this only makes Akimitsu imagine even more depraved scenes, which makes him even angrier. For his third question, he asks Kijo what he'd do if they were married, and he says he wants to have 10 sons, but Akimitsu's brain explodes from uncanny thoughts, causing his mouth to bleed. After they carry him away, Yuzuki apologizes for his behavior, but Kijo says it's alright because her friend is exactly how she described. This confuses her, so he explains that he considers himself an excellent judge of character, and based on what he's seen, he's certain that Akimitsu was worried about her because there was no lie in anything he said. Hearing this, Yuzuki remembers her mom telling her never to lie, so she apologizes to Kijo and confesses that she doesn't intend to get married. Sometime earlier, Kiki explained to Yuzuki that she'd be meeting Buddhist priests, and since her intention is to buy time until she becomes a nun, she could just get engaged and break it off in 3 years. Yuzuki felt that it was a scam, but Kiki explained that she could just get married to the suitor if she liked him, so she agreed to go along with the plan. Back in the present, Yuzuki explained everything to Kijo and begged him to get engaged to her so she could have more time. However, Kijo points out that the temple is currently in such a sorry state that it can't satisfy parishioners, and he agrees with the motion of shutting it down because he feels that keeping it open won't make anyone happy. With her friends in mind, Yuzuki tries to plead with him further, but he bluntly tells her that the Mikazuki temple isn't worth protecting. Akimitsu joins in begging him, but Kijo explains that the temple shutting down would be in his best interests, as it would allow him to slowly pay off his debt without serving there. As Kijo tries to leave, Akimitsu grabs his cloth and begs him to save the temple because they've saved him twice, but Kijo points out that the burden of taking care of the temple would be too much for Yuzuki to handle. However, Akimitsu decides to support her, and Kijo basically asks him proposal questions for Yuzuki, but he says yes with conviction every time, which makes Yuzuki flustered. Seeing this, Kijo finally agrees to the proposal, but makes it clear that he's only lending Yuzuki his name, so they thank him. He then enters another room, where the lady from earlier, High Priest Aoba, asks him why he didn't convince Yuzuki to close down the temple like they initially planned, so he explains that he was interested in Akimitsu. On their way back home, Akimitsu starts celebrating the fact that they won't have to shut down the temple, and Yuzuki gets teary-eyed, so she covers his face to stop him from seeing hers. However, when they arrive at the taxi station, they don't find any taxis around, and Yuzuki notices that there's an injury on her leg, so Akimitsu suggests resting somewhere. Suddenly, they notice that a love hotel is nearby, and Akimitsu tries to look away, but Yuzuki suggests going in. After checking into the hotel, Yuzuki starts suggesting some cultured activities for them to do together, but Akimitsu refuses to break his pact. However, they soon find themselves in a bedroom together, and after minutes of awkward silence, Yuzuki asks Akimitsu to go have a bath. While he's in the bath, Yuzuki enjoys some Brazzers classics, but immediately, when Akimitsu comes out, she turns it off. However, when she goes for a bath, Akimitsu turns on the television and sees the spicy drama she was watching, which makes him remember Kurage's claim that her sister is secretly a degenerate. Even though he's overflowing with temptations, Akimitsu jams his head into the wall and decides to protect her from himself. When Yuzuki comes out of the bath, she sees that Akimitsu has chained himself to the wall to prevent himself from giving into his urges.
Come on, man.
So she covers his eyes with some shades before heading to bed. The next day, Yuzuki and Akimitsu return home, and Tsukuyo scolds her sister for not informing her that she'd be staying overnight, so Yuzuki explains that her phone died. On the way to school, Yuzuki tells Tsukuyo about how they stayed in a love hotel overnight, and even though Tsukuyo is low-key jealous, she teases her sister, claiming she cheated less than a day after getting engaged. In a quieter tone, Tsukuyo tells Yuzuki not to let anyone know that Akimitsu is living with them, and Yuzuki points out that it's normal for temples to have live-in helpers, but Tsukuyo explains that people will lose their faith in them if they found out, since their temple is a nunnery. Later in class, Tsukuyo is feeling sad because Yuzuki has started acting differently ever since Akimitsu started living with them, and she remembers how Yuzuki used to be a straight-laced Green Arrow wannabe before he showed up. Just then, her two friends, Mana and Yuki, arrive and reveal that there are rumors that she has a boyfriend, causing her to spill her drink. She immediately denies the accusations, but Mana says there's eyewitness testimony that says she was seen kissing a boy by the river, and they went home afterwards. Tsukuyo claims that it's someone else, but when they mention that the guy was in shrine clothes, she remembers the kissing incident with Akimitsu, which makes her freak out while explaining that Yuzuki was there as well. However, this only gives them the confirmation they need to conclude that she has a boyfriend, and Mana informs her that Yuzuki is popular in school for her gorgeous looks, while she's popular for her enormous jugs. As they tease her, Tsukuyo is worried that she'd get into trouble if anyone finds out about Akimitsu living with them, but she sees that the idiot is downstairs at her school, and immediately closes the curtains to cover him. When she takes a closer look, she notices that he's carrying her lunch, and realizes that she's the one who messed up, so she runs downstairs to meet him. In the schoolyard, Akimitsu asks some boys for directions to Tsukuyo's class, and when they ask who he is, he starts to introduce himself, but Tsukuyo suddenly appears in a disguise and knocks him out. Hours later, Akimitsu wakes up in the nurse's office, where he sees Tsukuyo standing beside him, and he hands her the lunch pack as he walks away. However, Tsukuyo drags him back while explaining that the students playing sports outside would see him and get suspicious of him because of his clothes. She decides that he should hide there for the time being, but they suddenly hear a knock on the door, which makes her panic. Mana and Yuki walk in and see Tsukuyo sitting on the bed after stuffing Akimitsu inside to look like her legs, and she assures them that she's fine. But Akimitsu is losing his mind under the sheets. While talking, Mana points out that her legs look too long, so Akimitsu moves up to fix the length, but this only makes her scream awkwardly. Yuki suggests leaving since it's past their break period, but Mana asks Tsukuyo why she suddenly has the body shape of Rick Ross, so she presses Akimitsu's head deep into her plots.
Nice.
But this makes her even more embarrassed. However, Akamitsu starts suffocating, so he opens his mouth to inhale, but suddenly takes a bite of her cake,
Yeah, boy.
causing her to make a lady noise. Mana then asks her to rejoin the archery club for an upcoming tournament, but she declines their offer, saying she's too busy helping out at the temple, so they bid her farewell as they leave. With the girls gone, Akamitsu finally comes out of his hiding spot and asks Tsukuyo why she's no longer part of the archery club, but she explains that she's taking a break. Hearing this, Akamitsu decides to give her free time to rejoin by handling all the house chores, and Tsukuyo tries to stop him, but slips and falls. When her friends return, they see Tsukuyo in a weird position on top of Akamitsu, so she screams in embarrassment. Apparently, Tsukuyo has always admired how Yuzuki drew the bow elegantly, and in an attempt to become closer to her, she joined the archery club as well, but Yuzuki ended up quitting the club to focus on taking over the temple. The next day, Akamitsu watches while Yuzuki does archery practice, and afterwards, she reveals that she quit the archery club, so Akamitsu goes to ask Tsukuyo about it. As he knocks on her door, she refuses to open up, and Kurage explains that she's in shut-in mode, so the idiot hangs around her window like a low-budget Spider-Man until she finally agrees to let him in. When Tsukuyo asks what he wants, he tells her he's finished all the chores and assures her that it's fine for her to rejoin the archery club, but she says she doesn't want to do archery. He then asks why she chose to take a break instead of quitting, but she ignores his question and leaves the room. She heads to the archery room and starts practicing her form, but Akamitsu suddenly appears behind her, so she runs away. He chases her all the way to a hill, where she admits that she quit archery because she's not good at it and only started doing it because Yuzuki was doing it. She feels that Yuzuki is the one who should continue archery since she's popular and much better than her, and she claims that she can't do whatever she wants when Yuzuki is pushing herself hard for their sakes, but Akamitsu decides to show her something that would change her mind. He takes her to the main temple where Yuzuki is doing archery practice, but her arrow shot flops harder than One Punch Man Season 3, and Akamitsu explains to Tsukuyo that it's her true form. However, Tsukuyo still starts gushing over her sister, claiming she's better than Hawkeye, and Kurage explains to Yuzuki that Tsukuyo is so obsessed with her that just seeing her with a bow makes her picture a goddess, but Tsukuyo shuts her mouth before she can say more. Yuzuki then assures Tsukuyo that she's having tons of fun since she can do whatever she wants, and advises her to enjoy herself as well before asking her for archery lessons. Later that evening, Tsukuyo goes to the bath, but runs into Akamitsu changing, so she runs back out and informs him through the door that she's heading back to archery before thanking him for his help. She then asks him why he's doing so much for her, so he explains that he can relate to her because his family brought him inconveniences as well, and he also wants her to be happy. Hearing this, she enters the bathroom and leans in to kiss him, only to see some weird markings on his face. The next day, Tsukuyo is chilling at the archery club, and Akamitsu shows up to deliver her lunch, so she introduces him to her friends as part of her family. Some days later, Kurage is in her room, writing in her diary about how she's eager to become an adult, and her cat, Nagosuke, arrives, so she pets him. While jotting in her diary, she remembers how Akamitsu wistfully caught her when they first met, and she blushes because it was the closest she's felt to being a grown woman. After filling up her diary for the day, she lies on her bed and realizes that her family has started changing in a good way ever since Akamitsu showed up. She feels that she'll never run out of things to write in her diary when he's around, but he suddenly calls her to dinner, so she leaves the room. Meanwhile, Yuzuki just finished taking a bath, and she climbs the scale to check her weight but sees that she's now as heavy as Optimus Prime. Because of this, she holds a meeting with the other girls at the temple, where she tells them that their scale has a curse which makes it display a value higher than expected. Tsukuyo, the only one with a working brain, suggests that she just added weight, but Yuzuki points out that this phenomenon has been occurring ever since Akamitsu moved in. They all realize that Akamitsu's high-quality meals have been making them gain weight, so they agree that the scale is cursed, and Mia suggests buying a new scale, but they shut her down immediately. When Yuzuki asks for a second plan, Mia suggests reducing carb intake and going on a diet that involves only meat and vegetables, but Yuzuki says they're too broke to afford the items for such a diet. Tsukuyo then suggests exercise, and Yuzuki agrees but proposes that they all do it together because exercising alone can get tiring, and all the girls agree to start the next morning. At sunrise, all 5 girls engage in some spicy workout routines, and afterwards, they do their normal daily activities. That evening, the Council of Overweight Airheads holds another meeting, and since their attempt at exercising failed, Yuzuki suggests going for Plan B, which is dieting. However, Tsukuyo reminds her that they need Akamitsu's help in doing that, so Yuzuki explains that they can get Akamitsu to cook less by leaning into a rule they have at the temple, which says they can only eat everything they're served. Tsukuyo starts twitching in embarrassment at the thought of Akamitsu finding out about their dieting, and all the others tease her, but Kuraga says she wants Akimitsu to stay with them forever because she considers him part of the family. The others are surprised that Kuraga feels that strongly for him, but Kuraga makes it clear that she's mostly drawn to him because of the delicious treats he makes and asks Tsukuyo to marry him so he can stay with them forever. When the meeting resumes, Yuzuki claims that they're just growing because Akimitsu's cooking is mostly filled with vegetables, and they all bounce their heavy plots around in agreement, except Kurage, who is flatter than a surfboard. Suddenly, Akimitsu arrives and serves them some Japanese sweets for dinner, and they all throw away all their weight-watching plans to enjoy the feast. Later that night, Kuraga records these events in her diary and prays that Akimitsu waits for her to become an adult so she can have him forever. A while later, Akimitsu is making some curry, but Yuzuki suddenly arrives and asks him to start adding pickled radishes to their dishes. As she walks away, he notices that she's carrying an axe, so he follows her to her room, where he sees her through the door, destroying something with the axe. This makes him fear that she's transforming into Harley Quinn, so he decides to do something to cheer her up. Later that morning, all the other girls gawk at the amazing meal that Akimitsu has prepared, but he basically just made all of Yuzuki's favorites to put her in a better mood. Yuzuki silently walks by the table and eats the food with no reaction whatsoever, and this shocks Akimitsu, but he's confident that she'd be pleased by the high-quality pickled radishes that she asked for. However, Yuzuki eats those with no reaction as well, and Akimitsu is so shocked that his soul evaporates. While patrolling the yard, he sees Yuzuki moping on the ground, and she suddenly begs him to lend her a hand since her legs are failing her. Suddenly, Kiki appears behind her and starts toying with her leg while she screams and begs for mercy. After they've calmed down, Kiki explains to Akimitsu that Yuzuki was practicing a special training technique called Tizu, but she only managed to last 2 hours when she was meant to go for 2 days. When he asks about the axe, Kiki explains that she was doing firewood chopping, which is one of the daily chores to do while training. And she also reveals that Yuzuki's silence during breakfast is another part of the training. Hearing this, Akimitsu decides to support Yuzuki with all his strength, so when Kiki offers him a chance to train with her, he immediately agrees. Suddenly, Mia arrives and offers to train with them, so Akimitsu welcomes her to the party. Hours later, Akimitsu and Mia tell Tsukuyo about their new joint training with Kiki and Yuzuki, but she says they'd find a particular training routine called Tokudo hard. When they asked Kiki about it, she explains that Tokudo is a step they must take before entering the training ground, and it's basically becoming a priest. Hearing this, Akimitsu freaks out over the fact that he hasn't been a priest all this time, so Kiki calms him down by placing his head in her juicy melons.
Oh my God!
Suddenly, Yuzuki arrives and reveals that she's completed such hours of Teiju, so Kiki teases her weak legs again and tells her to do the wood chopping exercise. As she chops the wood, Kiki informs Akimitsu and Mia that Yuzuki has yet to achieve the title of priest because she hasn't done Tokudo yet, but she claims that Yuzuki has a warrior spirit because she's planning to finish the Tokudo, which normally takes a year, within 6 months, so she can become head priest as fast as possible. Hearing this, Akimitsu runs towards her and asks to join her, and all three of them agree to conquer the Tokudo together. Just then, Kijo arrives and meets with the girls in the living room, but Kiki suddenly starts acting salty towards him, while telling him that Yuzuki will complete the Tokudo within 6 months. However, Kijo throws a curveball by threatening to call off their engagement if she doesn't complete it in 3 months. The next morning, the 3 trainees gather in the yard, and Kiki announces that they'll begin training for Tokudo seriously starting that day, so that they can teach the 4-eyed scumbag a lesson. She then asks them what color their plot armors are, and Yuzuki tells her to take the training seriously since they're short on time, but she explains that she's being serious because training is meant to return their mind to a state of white, and this means that their plot covers have to be white as well. However, all 3 trainees say they don't have a white pair, so Kiki decides that they'd all train in commando mode. Shortly afterwards, Mia is losing her mind while supporting her bare fun bags with her arms during training. But Yuzuki says she can handle the embarrassment a little because it's training, but the virgin's face is already covered in blood due to overstimulation. To start their training for the day, Kiki takes them to the archery field for a process called zazen, where they'd meditate and try not to be distracted by any thoughts that enter their heads, else she'd whack their shoulder with a stick called a kyosaku. Akimitsu instantly reaches a state of peace in his mind, and he feels thankful to Kiki since he was hoping for exactly that kind of training. However, that peace is shattered when Kiki hits the shoulder of the girls, causing their gyats to jiggle beside him, and Bro's brain gets so fried that he passes out. For the next stage in their training, Kiki takes them to an art room, where they're meant to copy sutras, and she asks them to write each letter carefully. Even though he failed earlier, Akamitsu feels that this next challenge is going to be a breeze, and Kiki notices that he's nailing it, so he explains that he used to work part-time at a calligraphy school. After Kiki leaves the room, he tries to help Yuzuki, but he sees a glimpse of her melons, which makes his brain have a full meltdown. He jumps away, but accidentally knocks over the ink, spilling it all over his package. Seeing this, Mia offers to clean it while looking thirsty for his ice cream bar, but Yuzuki bonks both of them with a stick. Later that day, the three of them are walking through town, and Yuzuki tells Akamitsu and Mia that they don't have to accommodate her, but they insist on joining her and even inform her that they've bought white pairs of plot covers. However, when they return home, Kiki informs them that each of them will sleep on a single tatami mat, and they start ranting like spoiled brats, but she ignores them and moves ahead. While chilling outside, Kiki remembers when she asked Kijo why it had to be 3 months' time, and he explained that it was a decision made by the higher-ups because in 3 months, there will be a sect meeting at the temple. The next morning, all 3 trainees are exhausted because they barely got any sleep the previous night. But when they gather for training, Kiki says she's putting them through a different kind of training as a reward for their hard work so far. Minutes later, she puts them in a sauna together, and Akamitsu already collapses from overstimulation.
Come on, man.
So she explains that it's a drastic measure that would allow them to overcome their desires and develop a resistance to the opposite gender. After she leaves, Yuzuki motivates Akamitsu by telling him that they'd fail the Tokudo in 3 months if they can't handle that task, and he agrees, but when he turns, he sees the girls with their plots on display, which makes his brain start overheating. He manages to settle down in the middle of them and fights to overcome the weird thoughts he's having, but his hand suddenly touches Yuzuki, so he jumps away, but ends up landing on Mia's lap.
Yeah, boy.
When he jumps away, Mia asks him to turn off the lights, but Akamitsu tells her in a low tone that they can't keep hindering Yuzuki's progress, so they settle down and talk about their recent experiences instead. However, the 2 airheads only end up talking about all the weird cravings they had the previous night, and this makes Yuzuki embarrassed, but she reveals to them that Kiki wanted them to experience something called Makyo. The 2 idiots start imagining nonsense again, so she explains that Makyo is a state of extreme excitement that comes to the surface during extreme training, and overcoming it will make them immune to the effects of their weird thoughts. This makes them happy, and Mia asks Yuzuki to tell them her own extreme thoughts, but even though she knows she has been secretly craving Akamitsu's love bone ever since the day she saw it, she tells them that she doesn't have any sus thoughts. They start glazing her, saying she's already mastered the training, but deep down, she feels jealous that Akamitsu and Mia are acting very friendly with each other. Hours later, Kiki serves them breakfast while acknowledging that they've made some improvements, and she decides that they'd take the afternoon off, but the others argue that they're just getting started, so she explains that pushing themselves in a hurry will only lead to injuries. After she leaves, Yuzuki explains to the others that rest is also part of his training, but Akamitsu isn't happy about having free time that day because it's Christmas Eve, the day his dad used to cause chaos at home by cracking 50 of his maidens at the same time. Because of this, Akamitsu is scared of Christmas, so Yuzuki offers to go out with him that day. As they walk through the town, Yuzuki explains that they're going to be having a Christmas party at the temple where they'll exchange gifts, but Akamitsu's mind is melting because he doesn't want to give in to the temptation that his dad used to fall for. However, he ends up having fun with Yuzuki anyway, but he's confused about what gift to buy for himself, so she takes him to a Buddhist shop, where they see some attractive prayer beads. Since the prayer beads are expensive, Yuzuki feels that they should just manage the ones they have at home, but Marie arrives and reveals that she's the clerk of that store. She offers them a pair of prayer beads for couples, and Yuzuki says they're not a couple, but Marie argues that they have to be because they're on a date on Christmas Eve. This makes Yuzuki so embarrassed that her face becomes a red stop sign, but Mari keeps teasing her by pointing out how stylishly she dressed for the date until she buys an item from the store. On Christmas Day, all the sisters are enjoying snacks together at the table, and they all admit that they've changed because of Akamitsu, but Kagura suddenly leaves the room and starts plotting ways to stamp him out because she considers him a nuisance. Some hours later, everyone is in Christmas gear, and the girls officially kickstart their Christmas party, but Yuzuki reminds them that it's also an end-of-year party. While watching them, Akamitsu realizes that it's the perfect day to repay everyone for their kindness, so he decides to make his speciality for everyone and gives Yuzuki a special present he secretly bought her. Shortly afterwards, he serves the girls a bountiful feast, and they're surprised that the bum can afford high-grade meat, so he explains that he pulled some strings through his old job because it's a special day. Hearing this, Kuraga begs him to marry her, so he pats her on the head while promising to do it when she grows up, but the other girls advise her not to marry the loser. After enjoying dinner together, the girls decide that it's time to open their presents, and Akamitsu smiles because it's time to show gratitude to Yuzuki, has finally come, but he sees her tying some gift boxes on a sheet with ropes. When he asks what she's doing, she explains that she's getting ready to exchange presents, and they're meant to pull the ropes to see who they're giving presents to. Akimitsu is frustrated by the fact that the gift exchange is randomized, because it's his first Christmas party, and he planned to give each person their gifts separately. Yuzuki asks everyone to tie up their presents, but Mia goes up herself, so Tsukuyo tells her that it's not normal to offer her peaches as Christmas presents. However, Akimitsu ties himself up, and when they ask what he's doing, he says he plans to give someone an organ of his choosing.
Yeah, boy.
But all the girls say they don't need his worn-out organs. When they unveil the gifts, Kurage gets a pair of gloves, and Tsukuyo reveals that it's her gift, so she thanks her but mentions that she'd have preferred to have Akimitsu's pocket rocket as a gift instead. Akimitsu asks Tsukuyo what she drew, and she reveals that it's a weird toy called a kokishi, so Yuzuki reveals that it's her present. However, when Tsukuyo turns it on, it starts vibrating, and she freaks out as she realizes that the kokeshi might be one of Sophie Rain's sacred weapons. But Yuzuki ignores her and opens up a present box of her own. Yuzuki sees a marriage certificate inside the box, and apparently, it was sent by Kuraga, who drowns in misery as she wishes her sugar daddy, Akimitsu, had got it instead. Akimitsu and Mia both pull the same coupon gifts they put into the cart, so Kagura offers to exchange gifts, and she hands Akimitsu a disc, which contains some spicy photos of Mia. Mia immediately freaks out and starts strangling her, and Yuzuki feels that Akimitsu would never look at such depraved photos. But when she looks at him, she sees that he's already nosebleed in anticipation, so she forces him to hand over the disc. However, Kagura says she was only joking and then presents her real gift, which is a collection of free passes to the spring, and everyone cheerfully accepts the gift while thanking her for being so thoughtful. Later that evening, Akimitsu and Yuzuki drop some cake at the statue as an offering and say a prayer. Yuzuki thanks Akimitsu for accompanying her on the offering, but he says it's no big deal because he had such a fun Christmas. She blushes while thanking him for bringing them joy, and Akimitsu feels that it's the perfect chance to hand her the present, but when he pulls it out, she offers him one as well, leaving both of them shocked. When they open the presents, they see that they're the prayer beads from Mari's shop, and they realize that Mari was trying to be their wing woman all along. After putting them on, they remember Mari telling them earlier that couples at Buddhist weddings exchange prayer beads instead of rings, so their faces turn red. However, Kiki crashes their romantic moment and informs Yuzuki that there's a problem with her Tokudo ceremony because the location is now their temple, and this means that the temple will be inspected to determine if it will still hold or not. A while later, the entire gang arrives at the hot springs, and the lovebirds are still sad. So Kiki assures them that the problems will be fixed somehow, and Kagura reveals that all expenses have already been paid for the trip. As they enter the resort, a butler hands Akimitsu a special towel with his name on it and then gives him a special drink, which fries his brain. Soon after, the girls enter the hot spring, where Mia explains to them that Kagura has always been by her side, even when she ran away from home, and she joined her in coming to Japan. Yuzuki and Tsukuyo point out that she's mysterious, and Mia admits that she is, but assures them that Kagura would never betray her because she's her best friend. Meanwhile, Akimitsu is hiding in the corner, wondering what the girls are doing in his private bath, and he realizes that his Excalibur has gone into overdrive. As he plans to escape, Kagura spots him but signals him to be quiet before sitting with the girls. Akimitsu thinks she's on his side, so he tries to sneak away, but she tells the girls that they have to kick Akimitsu out if they catch him peeping at them. Shockingly, the girls say they'd talk to him about it first before doing something like that, and Akimitsu is so moved by their faith in him that he decides to come clean to them. However, as he approaches them, Kagura swiftly uses her soap to knock away his towel, revealing his glowing eggplant, which makes all the girls scream. Soon after, the girls leave the resort, but Kagura decides to stay behind, so Mia offers to take another dip with her as well. Akimitsu tries to leave with the others, but Kagura reminds him that he still has a situation with his trouser snake, so he decides to take a dip. As he relaxes in the pool, Kagura tries to tempt him, but he resists her, so she reveals that she's the one who drugged his drink, as part of her plan to make him leave the temple and raise Mia to become the ultimate harem queen. However, Mia sees them through the glass, so Kagura uses hypnosis to knock her out, and does the same to Akimitsu. Hours later, Akimitsu wakes up in a dark room where he's tied to a chair, and Kagura reveals that she's secretly working for Mia's family. But Akimitsu tells her to help Mia fight against her family instead, so she asks him why he came to the temple in the first place. He says it's to escape his desires, so Kagura explains that he's just like Mia for running away from his family, and she offers to pay his debt if he moves out of the temple. The next day, the entire squad gathers in the yard to pound some mochi, and Yuzuki explains to Akimitsu that they make a whole bunch every year to hand to their supporters. When she opens the pot, all the girls are amazed by how good it looks, and Yuzuki decides that they should split into 2 groups for the work. Akimitsu decides to join the team of Tsukuyo and Kurage, and after they accept him, he makes up his mind to work diligently because it's part of his training. As he tries to pound the mochi, Kurage disrupts him by saying that it's a weird activity because of the reason behind it, but Tsukuyo explains that it's a fertility thing. However, Kurage points out that the mallet represents the man's hammer, while the pot represents the woman's cookie, and she starts demonstrating the action until Akimitsu yells at her to stop. He then asks Tsukuyo to switch roles with him, and she agrees, but Kurage argues that it's abnormal, so Tsukuyo tells her to shut her trap. As Tsukuyo pounds through mochi, her melons start jiggling, and Akimitsu's brain completely freezes until she reminds him to knead the mochi. Since he's failing at his task, Tsukuyo hands him back the hammer, but just as he's about to start pounding, Kurage distracts him by bringing up Tsukuyo's plots, so he pokes his eyes to avoid them. As Akimitsu washes his eyes in the bathroom, he asks Kurage why she made the joke earlier, and she says it's because she thought he'd like it. When she asks if he likes her tiny plots, he laughs and walks away, so she decides to become an adult as fast as she can. Akimitsu returns to the yard, but he doesn't find Mia and Kagura. Suddenly, Mia arrives in a bunny girl cosplay, which she calls the ceremony's formal attire, and Kagura reveals that it's actually a real outfit in the festival books. Akimitsu feels that Mia could catch a cold in that outfit, but Kagura brings a stove, so she warms herself up. However, they make Akimitsu cover her from behind while sharing a haori as she prepares to pound the mochi, and Kagura tells him to grab her cushions for balance. But he holds her tummy instead and pounds the mochi with her. He's happy that the method is working, but sees that Mia's skull is overheating, and Tsukuyo arrives in her own maid outfit to take her place. As Akimitsu argues with her, Kurage shows up in an oversized Bugs Bunny cosplay, asking why she's the only one in an animal costume. Akimitsu struggles to keep his urges at bay with the 2 bunny baddies around, but Yuzuki suddenly arrives and threatens to skewer him for forcing them into wearing the bunny girl outfits. After he explains himself, Yuzuki says she's never heard of a bunny girl penance before, and he realizes that it's all part of Kagura's plot to get rid of him. Later, Akimitsu cooks some miso soup for the girls, but Yuzuki says Kiki is outside, so Akimitsu decides to take her food to her. When he hands Kiki the food, she thanks him and asks him to join her for a drink, but he declines. As she enjoys the soup, she praises him for being a better chef than Gordon Ramsay, but he tells her she doesn't have to drink outside. Kiki explains that she likes the view from outside, and he notices how pretty the moon is, so he starts drinking as well. She then thanks him for helping Yuzuki out with her tokudo preparations, and explains that crossing this step will bring Yuzuki closer to her dream of taking over the Mikazuki temple. However, she mentions that Yuzuki would have to discover the temple's true form afterwards, because taking over the temple isn't the finish line, but actually the starting point. Kiki then asks Akimitsu if he plans to keep working there after Yuzuki has taken the tokudo, or undergo the tokudo himself to become a head priest. She then tells him that she'll leave the temple after Yuzuki takes over, and she's sure Yuzuki would find it encouraging if he stayed with her. The next morning, all the girls put on their yukatas to celebrate the new year, but Akimitsu tells them to put on some disguises because they're in enemy territory. However, Yuzuki informs him that the shrines are no longer at war with each other, and Tsukuyo shows him her new look, so he glazes her until she gets flustered and runs away. He then meets up with Kurage and tells her she looks cute, but she tells him beautiful is the proper word to use for a grown woman. However, she immediately runs off to get some candy from a merchant, so Akimitsu meets up with Mia, who complains that she doesn't know how to draw a fortune. After giving her directions, he tells her she looks beautiful and claims that complimenting women the right way is challenging for him, so she explains that he needs to look at girls directly and say exactly what he finds attractive about them. Shortly after, Yuzuki approaches Akimitsu in her yukata, and he immediately uses the TikTok pickup line he learned from Mia, which makes her cringe. They notice that the girls are having fun, and Yuzuki explains to Akimitsu that it's the first time they visited a shrine on New Year's Day in a while, because they usually have a lot of work at that time of the year. She feels that they'd be able to enjoy New Year's that way moving forward, and Akimitsu agrees, but when he remembers Kagura's offer, he realizes that the shrine's money problems will be solved if he moves out. However, Yuzuki says she'll keep fighting for the temple, and this makes him remember the promise he made to support her, so he rushes to meet Kagura. As Kagura reminisces about her past, Akimitsu suddenly arrives, so she asks him what his answer is, and he admits that her offer is a great one but decides to decline it anyway. She reminds him of how large his debt is and asks if he plans on robbing Elon Musk to pay it, but he says he'll find a way out of the situation. He then explains that he doesn't want to run away because he promised to support Yuzuki any way he can, and Kagura withdraws the offer, so he starts celebrating the fact that he can now fulfill Mia's promise of not betraying her. Hearing this, Kagura gets angered because she knows that Mia is watching from the sidelines while his love story with Yuzuki progresses, and she angrily tells him that he doesn't know anything about Mia. However, Akimitsu says he's relieved that she can get angry on Mia's behalf and claims that she cares more about Mia than her family's circumstances. This confuses her, so he explains that Kagura's actions weren't actually a betrayal, but a display of her care and love for Mia. Overwhelmed with embarrassment, Kagura kicks him right in the marbles and sprays off the germs on her legs before walking away. The next morning, Akimitsu wakes up and checks his package, and he thanks the gods that all his infinity stones are still in place. When Yuzuki arrives to check on him, he says he feels like nothing can scare him anymore, but the instant he mentions Kagura's name, Bro hides himself in his futon like a turtle. Shortly after, he's having tea with Mia, and he asks her where the others are, so she explains that Kuraga and Tsukuyo are still asleep while Kagura is playing Grand Theft. However, he starts shivering again after hearing Kagura's name, so Mia uses it to jump scare him a couple more times before dragging him to meet her. Mia then announces that she's launching a matchmaking program for them, and Kagura is confused, so she explains that Akimitsu is acting like she's traumatized him by forcing him to binge-watch Boruto. Since she doesn't want her best friend and brother-in-arms to be on bad terms, she decides to help them become as close as Bonnie and Clyde. To begin the operation, she asks Akimitsu what he thinks about Kagura, and he says she's a female Darth Vader, so directs the question at Kagura, who calls him a wonderful person. This makes Mia happy because she has no idea that Kagura is still planning to boot him from the temple, and she decides to skip to the final stage by locking both of them in a shed until the next morning. After she leaves, Akimitsu starts shivering while Kagura talks about all the weird things she taught Mia, and he realizes that she's responsible for all of Mia's misconceptions. Kagura then asks him why he hasn't told Mia about her plans, but he says he couldn't do it because he values his relationship with her and wants to be friends with her rather than rivals. This makes her blush, and she asks if he's hitting on her, but he runs to the corner and explains that it wasn't what he was trying to do. Suddenly, Kagura kicks open the door, and as they walk outside, she plans to make Akimitsu fall for Mia so that she can bring him back to Mia's family. She then asks Akimitsu to be friends with her, but he screams in shock. A while later, Akimitsu corners Tsukuyo against a wall, and she closes her eyes while begging him to only go 5 rounds. But when she opens her eyes, she sees that she's on her bed, clutching Kuraga's neck. Minutes later, Tsukuyo is scanning the fridge, wondering why she's suddenly having Gunnar dreams of Akimitsu, but Akimitsu suddenly arrives and greets her with a cheerful smile. While watching him, she realizes that he's an airhead whom she only dreamt about because he kissed her, and she decides to forget it, since it was a mistake. As he talks with Mia about their breakfast plans, Tsukuyo feels jealous as she wonders when they got so close, but Kagura interrupts her brainstorming and offers to show her the answer to her question on her video recorder. Kagura then shows her a video of Akimitsu doing penance dances with Mia while making weird sounds, but she freaks out because she thinks they're role-playing overflow. A while later, Tsukuyo invites Mia to the living room for interrogation and accuses her of being the reason that discipline in the temple is slipping, but Mia argues that there isn't a single shameful thing about her. When Tsukuyo asks her if she likes Akimitsu, she coldly replies that she doesn't, but Tsukuyo says she's capping because she's seen them being close, so Mia explains that they're training partners. However, Mia claims that Akimitsu is the most handsome guy in the world, and explains that he's the perfect training partner for her since she seeks to overcome her desires, which is why she dreams of spending the rest of her life with him. Hearing this, Kagura immediately ties her up, and Tsukuyo cries as she realizes that Mia's feelings for Akimitsu are stronger than she thought. Tsukuyo remembers all the weird stuff he did to her, and also his promise to make her happy, but Kagura accused her of being jealous, so she argues that she doesn't have feelings for Akimitsu. Suddenly, Akimitsu arrives, and when he sees Mia tied up in a bondage position, his hormones erupt.
I'm gonna come.
And he asks Tsukuyo what's going on, but she's too embarrassed to even look at him. She decides to ask him directly about the video, but when she asks Kagura to roll the clip, Kagura realizes that her camera is missing. Just then, Kuraga walks in with the camera, and Tsukuyo fears that her little sister's mind could get rotten after watching the video, so she asks her not to. However, Kuraga plays it anyway and shows her pea-brained sister that they were just playing a game with the mat on the ground. Hours later, Akimitsu is preparing to cook dinner, and he realizes that the girls are so broke that they may not be able to afford repairs on the principal figure. However, he decides to help out by saving food expenses, but when he opens the rice pot, he sees that it's empty, causing him to freak out. The noise alerts the girls, and when he explains the situation to Yuzuki, she decides that they should collect tributes. On the way, Akamitsu asks why they collect tributes instead of money. So Yuzuki explains that the goal of the temple isn't to make a profit, but rather to offer service out of kindness. He then asks if it's all right for himself and Mia to tag along, and she claims that it is because meeting parishioners is also part of their training, as it allows them to know the people their temple exists to serve. Hearing this, Akamitsu and Mia get excited to express their gratitude to those people, but when they arrive, a bald old man tells them to leave, claiming that he has no rice. They try several other homes, but get harshly rejected as well, but an old lady agrees to help them if they clean her home. After hours of cleaning, Akamitsu and Mia are tired and frustrated on a bench, so Yuzuki explains that their parishioners are mostly troubled people before announcing that it's time to head to their next stop. Luckily, the lady gladly welcomes them and offers to give them as much rice as they want. As Yuzuki and Mia play with the lady's sons, she explains to Akamitsu that nobody failed to pay tribute when Yuzuki's mom, Tsukina, was around because she was scary, but she also made them feel secure. However, now that she's gone, everyone is anxious as they wonder what will happen to the Mikazuki temple. Afterwards, she gives them an entire army's worth of rice, and as Akagami carries the rice bag, he remembers how he first met Yuzuki. He decides to support her as much as he can, but then sees that she's effortlessly carrying a dozen rice bags on her own, making him think that she might be a Viltrumite. The next day, Akamitsu is working hard on his computer because he doesn't want Yuzuki to carry the burden alone, but the site he's logging into asks for his contact information. He can't use the temple's number since he doesn't want the others to find out, and he doesn't have a smartphone, so he decides to borrow one in the meantime. He heads to Yuzuki's room to ask her, but she comes out wearing a maid costume, which makes his brain short-circuit, and asks him to enter her room so they can discuss properly. Inside her room, she asks what he wants, but Akamitsu's mind is spiraling, as he wonders why she's acting like she usually does despite being in a maid outfit. He manages to calm himself down and tells her that he has a request for her, but she starts role-playing his favorite maid waifu while offering to do whatever he wants, and Rose starts shaking like a leaf. However, he nails himself with a Detroit smash to regain composure and asks her to lend her smartphone, and she immediately agrees. But he still struggles with weird fantasies of her. By the time she finds her phone, Akamitsu has already nosebleed a bucket of blood on the floor, so she points out that he's acting weird. When they both calm down, she hands him the phone and asks why he needs it, so he explains that he needs to borrow her contact information to work. He feels satisfied that he's accomplished his mission, but she suddenly grabs the phone from his hand and asks him what kind of clothes he's wearing. Even though he's bamboozled by her sudden, weird question, he decides to give the straight answer and tells her monk's work clothes. She admits that he's right and explains that he's wearing them because of his training, which he should be focusing on at the moment instead of thinking about working. Akamitsu argues that he needs to contribute as much as possible for the principal statue repairs, but Yuzuki tells him not to worry about it because she plans to work. However, he points out that it would take a long time for a high school student working part-time to earn 500,000 yen, but she informs him that she plans on working 6 jobs at once, which makes him question how she could be so boneheaded. He tries to beg her to help, but she tells him that she doesn't want to impose on anyone because she started it herself, and she also brings up the fact that her mother did it alone before assuring him that she'll figure something out. When he asks what she'll do, she says she'll double her shifts, but he calls her dumb and asks her to let him handle it since he has plenty of work experience. However, she calls him a pathetic coward for not looking at her, so he explains that her dressing is turning his brain upside down, and this makes her embarrassed. She explains that the maid uniform is her friend's work uniform, and she borrowed it to try it on because her friend suggested they work together, but he points out that she's already looking tired. However, she argues that she isn't, but he says her uniform is proof of her exhaustion, so she decides that they should make a bet, where he'd win if he could make her fall asleep. When he asks how he could pull it off, she suggests doing a massage and lies down on the bed to let him do the job. However, the degenerate hesitates as he realizes that touching her directly could make his brain cells drift into outer space, but she says she won't give him the smartphone if he doesn't go through with it, so he finally begins massaging her. Yuzuki tries to act smug while trolling him, but she suddenly starts twitching as he applies pressure on the right spots, and Akamitsu realizes that she's truly exhausted, so he locks in and uses more intense massage techniques. The devils on his shoulder advise him to seize the opportunity by grabbing her plots, and he gets even more motivated when he sees the look of embarrassment on her face, but instead of folding, he does a muda muda punch rush on her back, which makes her scream weirdly. Hearing this, Tsukuyo assumes that her sister is in trouble, so she rushes into the room to save her, only to see Akamitsu using a wrestling submission on her. Since Yuzuki is still conscious, she tries to declare her victory, but starts falling asleep, and Akamitsu tells her to give up, but she refuses. When he asks why she's so adamant, she yells that it's none of his business, so Akamitsu asks Tsukuyo to go out with him the next day before walking out of the room. That night, Tsukuyo has a dream where Akamitsu gets married to her and tries to do bedroom dances with her immediately. And when she wakes up, she accidentally sends Kuraga flying with a headbutt. A while later, Tsukuyo is in the shower, wondering if Akamitsu really has feelings for her, but she realizes that it's impossible and decides that she won't think too hard about that day. However, she ends up wearing all her favorite clothes for the date, but Akamitsu arrives in his regular work clothes, which makes her sad as she feels that she misunderstood his intentions. Akamitsu compliments her look, and she gets so embarrassed that she starts blushing and asks him to move ahead with her. While walking together, Tsukuyo asks where they're going, and he explains that he wants her to show him the way to the phone shop. Shortly after, they arrive at the phone store, and the clerk recommends a phone she thinks is suitable for them. So Akamitsu decides to buy it, but the clerk winks at Tsukuyo. After leaving the store, Tsukuyo is still drowning in embarrassment because of the clerk's gesture, and she decides to go home, but Akamitsu hands her a juice to thank her for her help. As she drinks the juice, Akamitsu suggests going home, but she drags him back because she low-key wants to spend more time with him. She has an entire civil war in her mind, wondering whether or not to confess her feelings, but she ends up asking to exchange contact information with him. After she gives him her number, Akamitsu celebrates because it's the first time he's getting a girl's number, and he explains to her that women usually run away when they hear his last name. When she asks why he bought the phone, he says he wants to do some secret communications, but she starts imagining sus scenes again, which makes her lose her cool. Several years ago, Yuzuki was having a walk with her mother, Tsukina, and Yuzuki told Tsukina about her plans to take over the temple. So Tsukina reminded her that it was a lot of work. In the present, Yuzuki is drowning in misery because she hasn't spoken with Akamitsu ever since she crashed into him in her maid outfit, and she feels that he's mad at her, so she decides to apologize to him. However, when she peeks out the door, she sees Akamitsu having a cheerful conversation with Tsukuyo, so she runs away. A while later, Akamitsu is on his phone, wondering why there aren't any decent posts on job hunting sites at the start of the year. When he remembers the talk with Yuzuki, he realizes that his response was immature, so he decides to apologize to her that day. As he enters her room, Yuzuki greets him with a smile as radiant as the sun, making him leap back in shock while responding to her. She tries to hide her flustered face while leaving the room, but stubs her toe on the table, causing her to be launched around the room like a ping-pong ball. After she gets back up, he tries to talk to her, but Kiki suddenly arrives and tells Yuzuki to carry some boxes to the storage shed before asking Akamitsu to speak with her privately. They meet privately outside, where Akamitsu tells her about what happened between him and Yuzuki, and she concludes that it's just a couple's quarrel. She then gives him a corny pep talk before advising him not to lose sight of what matters, but he still doesn't understand her, so she asks what he thinks of Yuzuki. Akamitsu explains that Yuzuki is dependable, and even though she's a bit careless, she's always positive and much stronger than he is. However, Kiki claims that it's his bias speaking, and Kuraga arrives to inform her that there are some people who want to perform an act called Raiden, which is basically cutting ties with the temple. Kiki immediately runs ahead because she sees it as a golden opportunity, and Akamitsu is confused, so she explains that the people in question will have to pay them a certain fee to remove their family's grave, but he sees her as a money-hungry lunatic. However, Kiki doesn't mind at all as she plans to bill them 100 times the regular amount, but when they arrive, they see Yuzuki waving them away. She informs them that the people are going to transfer their grace to another temple in the neighborhood since the Mikazuki temple isn't good for them. But when Kiki asks about the Raiden fee, she tells her she didn't collect any because her mom decided they wouldn't collect withdrawal fees from supporters. Kiki faints in disappointment, but Yuzuki points out that the people still came despite the poor location when her mom was around, but they said they can't trust the temple now. Because of this, she concludes that she's a fraud who can't measure up to her mom, and she feels bad that all her efforts to make them trust her aren't enough, but she decides to keep working harder. However, Kiki informs her that she'll no longer train her anymore, and when Akamitsu asks why, Kiki walks away while telling them to figure it out for themselves. The next morning, Yuzuki wakes up and remembers that she doesn't have training that day, but she decides that she won't get depressed over it. Shortly afterwards, she announces in the living room that she plans to do her best that year, and the girls figure out that she plans on cleaning the place. However, Tsukuyo points out that it basically isn't work anymore since they have the human cleaning machine, Akimitsu, who makes sure the temple is sparkling most of the time. When she asks where Akimitsu is, Kagura explains that he follows Kiki out for business, but Tsukuyo complains that she has no idea where he is because he hasn't been responding to her texts. Miet is shocked that she has Akimitsu's number, so she and Kurage complain that they want the number as well, but Kagura reveals that she has Akimitsu's number. As they pester Tsukuyo, she turns to Yuzuki for help but sees that she's already long gone. Meanwhile, Yuzuki walks to the statue room, hoping to do her best in cleaning it, but she meets it sparkling brighter than Vin Diesel's head. She remembers her promise to Akimitsu that she'd figure something out and decides that she'd find a way to do it because her mom did it alone. After leaving the room, she explores the town, but a weirdo suddenly approaches her for some private yoga, so she runs away as fast as she can. Meanwhile, Akimitsu is at a restaurant, begging Kiki to resume her training with Yuzuki, but she refuses, saying that Yuzuki doesn't have the right. As he continues to beg her, Kiki tells him that there's no need for her to get involved because Yuzuki has to figure it out for herself, and she tries to leave but sees that it's raining. Suddenly, Akimitsu gets a call from Tsukuyo, who informs him that Yuzuki has gone missing, so he dashes into the rain to find her. He checks all the places they visited together, but can't find her, so he runs ahead to check even more places. Meanwhile, Yuzuki is in the shed Akimitsu once hid in, and she realizes that she has a fever, but she still decides to try harder so that she can become trustworthy and perfect like her mom. As Akimitsu runs towards the shed, he doubts that she'll be in there because he knows she's much stronger than he is. However, he finds her in the shed, and when he sees her sick face, he realizes that she's been smiling to hide her insecurities all this time, so he hugs her. Some hours later, Yuzuki wakes up in her bed, and she's shocked to see Akimitsu napping beside her. They try to apologize to each other, but their empty skulls end up colliding, causing them to laugh. When she asks how he found her at the shed, he explains that the shed has value to him because it was where she turned his life around by saving him. He then holds her hand while asking her to let him be part of her relationships, but she cries while telling him that she doesn't want to cause trouble for him anymore, so he explains that he's doing it because he loves the temple as much as she does. This makes her remember why she decided to take over the temple in the first place, so she smiles while thanking him. When Kiki arrives, Yuzuki tells her that she's figured out that her goal is to protect the relationship between the temple and everyone as head priest, and she begs her to become her trainer again, so Kiki finally agrees. As Kiki walks away, Akimitsu thanks her, but she explains that she didn't do anything because Yuzuki simply figured out what a high priest should be. That's it for this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed and watched this video on screen.